Hey folks, Stephen Robbins here, immigration lawyer in Yakima, Washington. We are going to be playing a brief clip. This is the clip of the week or whatever you want to call it. We don't have a name for it yet. If you want to hear more immigration content, make sure to check out the podcast, Redirect Immigration Law and Perspectives over at redirectpodcast.com. You can subscribe on iTunes or on Stitcher or wherever they have it. Today we're going to be playing a clip from Trump's foreign policy speech. It's a big deal whenever Trump reads a speech because it's hard for him to read words. Here's a speech he gave this week. These are supposed to be his ideas. This is him getting away from being an offensive demagogue and actually presenting some solutions to real problems, because we know that the world has real problems. So let's, I said some mean things earlier about him not being able to read. Let's give him a chance. Let's hear him out. Let's see what he has to say.
Into this country, those who share our values and respect our people. In the Cold War, we had an ideological screening test.
That's true. During the Cold War, you couldn't come into the country if you were a communist, and that actually is still true. So that question is still on most of the immigration forms. If you are a communist, then you are technically inadmissible, and you could be denied permanent residency or presumably a visa of any type. So that was the case, and it still happens to be. I don't expect Trump necessarily to know that, but just for your gee whiz file.
The time is overdue to develop a new screening test for the threats we face today. I call it extreme vetting. I call it extreme vetting.
He actually calls it extreme vetting, which is even more extreme than just regular extreme vetting. This is, first of all, a hilarious name. Second of all, he's involved in the writing of the speech now because it's a totally Trump name. You know that he was sitting there in a meeting saying that we should call it extreme vetting. The idea that we would screen people for certain ideologies is not new or different. It's not even that extreme necessarily. It's something that we already do. So if people have belonged to groups, provided financial support to groups, if they know people who are members of certain groups that can cause issues for their visas or for their permanent residency or their citizenship, whatever they might be applying for. And so that is something that sort of already exists. Again, maybe he doesn't know that, but and perhaps he's proposing something even more extreme or more extreme than what exists currently. But let's hear him out. There's a little bit left, so.
Our country has enough problems. We don't need more, and these are problems like we've never had before.
It's true that we have problems, and it's true that we've had problems before. I don't know that these problems are unique or unlike other problems we've had in the past. We went through World War II, we went through the Cold War, like he said, the Civil War. There have been complicated times. I know it's easy to want to imagine that our time is both the best and the most complicated, but that's probably actually not true.
In addition to screening out all members of the sympathizers of terrorist groups, we must also screen out any who have hostile attitudes toward our country or its principles, or who believe that Sharia law should supplant American law.
I did want to take a second to point out how bad, that's a nice screen freeze there of Trump. I did want to take a second to point out how bad Trump is at reading a teleprompter. Trump has two problems with the teleprompter. One, he doesn't know how to read very well. He probably doesn't read very often. And, no offense. Two, he obviously hasn't prepared for the speech. So if you're not a strong reader, which is totally fine, but you've read the speech 2 or 3 times, at least, probably 5 or 6 times, you've practiced it in the mirror, you've practiced it to your staff, then that gives you those little spaces where you can look from one teleprompter to the other without pausing or without sort of awkwardly stumbling through the speech. But
Those who do not believe in our Constitution or who support bigotry and hatred will not be admitted for immigration into our country.
That's kind of already the law. I mean, we already do that. He hasn't proposed any specifics, like specifically how are they going to change the vetting. He's just said that we aren't going to let bad guys into the United States, which, believe it or not, is and has been the policy of the United States for a really long time. So
only those who we expect to flourish in our country and to embrace a tolerant American society should
that's like a super ironic use of the word tolerant, but
be issued visas. To put these new procedures in place, we will have to temporarily suspend immigration from some of the most dangerous and volatile regions of the world that have a history of exporting terrorism. Not for us. Not for us.
you could do that and you're still going to have problems with terrorism. You could still have somebody from France who is not affiliated technically in any sort of traceable way with certain religions, and they could come here and they could do terrible things. Just like we have people in the United States who commit acts of terrorism all the time. They can be race motivated, or like the shooting in Charleston about a year ago, I believe. You could have crazy people shoot up movie theaters. You could have people motivated by, whatever it might be. They could be U.S. citizens, undocumented immigrants, documented immigrants, people here as permanent residents, temporary residents, literally whatever it might be. And so this seems like a proposal that is really mostly just a rehash of policy that already exists, and red meat for his supporters and people who who've been sort of stirred up in the last few years by right-wing radio to be afraid of things like the word Sharia. Trump's foreign policy speech, extreme vetting, you guys, extreme vetting. Extreme.
Besides the fact that we already do it, there are huge problems with ideological screening, the fact that it's unreliable. Sometimes the wrong people get screened out, and it's hard to do. It's hard to do on a consistent basis. And I think if you're giving a foreign policy speech and your big idea is to make a callback to the Red Scare, which is not a proud moment in U.S. history. It's not looked back typically by most Americans with much fondness. It's sort of understood to be a moment of American irrationality, over-the-top scare tactics and things like that. Fear of a real but a mostly inflated enemy. And if that's your big foreign policy idea, to make a call back to that and to try to resurrect those thoughts and those feelings in Americans, then it's probably time to come up with some new ideas.